Do they need a respirator, ventilator, so on and so forth? So it gives a lot of information that's very valuable for clinic and patient decision support as well as treatment planning. And so motivated by this, what we did was we had a collaboration with DarwinAI that was spun off from our lab. And one of our main goals was how do we actually create an initiative that everyone can benefit around the world, regardless of whether you're young or old, rich or poor, depending on demographics, that you should have equal access. So what we did was together, we launched the COVIDNet initiative. And so the COVIDNet initiative is a global deep learning initiative for COVID-19 detection and risk stratification from chest radiography. And one of the key unique parts about this initiative that help really differentiate us, our innovations compared to everybody else, because it is completely open source, completely open access, anyone can use it, anyone can access it. And not only that, unlike a lot of initiatives, we also provide continuous improvements. So we have a team regularly preparing regular new releases of new models and data as it comes. So they're always there to get the most updated version that has seen more patients, that has a larger data corpus to really help accelerate advancements in this area. It started off as a team of two between myself and Linda Wang, a former student of the University of Waterloo and one of my master's students at the time. And now that team has grown significantly because we've received a lot of worldwide global recognition as well as support. Because to now, the COVIDNet initiative is surprisingly not, despite the short period of time, now used around the world on all continents. So we received a lot of positive feedback as well as collaborative support from everywhere around the world, and we've been very appreciative and happy about that because it really shows this initiative is not only resonating, but it's actually having an impact. And of course, we've also received widespread coverage from different sources from around the world, from Forbes to ZDNet to MIT Technology Review, so on and so forth. And so based on this joint initiative, our goal is how do we actually solve this operational challenge to enable widespread adoption of essentially AI for, in this case, COVID-19 detection as well as risk stratification. And this is one of our ways of trying to bring innovation from our lab to a reality that benefits society at large. And so just a bit of a description, high-level description of the COVIDNet initiative on spreading the innovations that we've created from the lab and from our teams to the world. It actually comprises of 4 main initiatives. So for the first initiative is what we call COVIDX, which is our open access benchmark data set that is made available to the world. So as they come with innovations, they could benchmark using a common benchmark and see whether they're doing well, whether they're not doing well, and to help really spawn innovation and ideas in the area. And for the COVIDX benchmark set, we've already grown it to cover not only just a large corpus of chest x-rays, but also CT scans and so on and so forth, and as well as risk stratification radiologist scores. So I'll talk more about that later. The next part is what we call the COVIDNet CXR. So COVIDNet CXR is our main initiative for training tailored deep learning models specifically for SARS-CoV-2 detection from chest X-ray data. And so given chest X-ray image, COVIDNet CXR will determine or predict the likelihood that somebody might be free of COVID, so normal. They might have non-COVID infections, so they might have viral infections, fungal infections, so on and so forth, that results in pneumonia, but is not COVID virus related. And of course, last but not least, determine the probability or the likelihood that is a COVID-19 infection. That leads us to our third main innovation initiative, which is the COVIDNet S initiative. So, which is the development and creation and advancement of tailored deep learning models for SARS-CoV-2 severity assessment from chest X-ray data. So now that we've kind of identified an individual to potentially have COVID-19, can we then determine the severity of the disease based on the overall spread as well as the extent and degree of the spread in the lungs to then be able to help guide or help frontline workers determine what is the next course of action? And last but not least, we have COVID-Net CT, which is similar to what we've done for chest X-rays, except it is tailored deep learning models for SARS-CoV-2 detection from CT scans. And so that's a high-level, I guess, overview of the initiative. So how do we actually do it? One of our main focuses has been how do we build it fast? And so we needed to build COVID-Net initiative fast because at a much more accelerated rate than we usually do, given the urgency of the pandemic, because the pandemic doesn't wait. And so we set our goal is we wanted to build it in less than 7 days of the start to act as a reference point for the global community to build upon and drive innovation. So the problem we had at hand, the challenge we had was building custom tailor-made deep learning solutions for a specific task and specific requirements. So for a clinical setting, for the task of COVID-19 detection and risk stratification, that would typically take months to a year, even for large enterprises to plan around and create. So how can a small team of 2 at a time build deep neural networks tailored for COVID-19 detection in such a short amount of time? And so the key idea that we leveraged was how do we combine human experience and expertise through human-driven design guidance with machine-driven design exploration and understanding. So how do we leverage our expertise in creating the scaffolding, molding, as well as defining the main requirements that we need for having reliable COVID-19 detection while allowing the machine to take this information, learn from it, and build something that meets the requirements and is better than what humans can build. And there's a number of benefits to this, what we call a human-machine collaborative design approach. So the first key benefit is accelerated scalable development beyond what humans and AIs can do independently. Humans have their strengths, AI has their strength. How do you combine in a way that enables accelerated development? The next thing, which is actually very important, is this human-machine collaborative design approach enables greater transparency into model design and performance for more trustworthy deep learning development and regulatory compliance, which is a very important factor from a healthcare perspective. Even though our goal has been more on the research side, by making sure that we have great transparency, it allows us to develop better technologies as we go. And so based on this idea, human-machine collaboration, we leverage the notion of explainable design automation, which is, can we actually work with an explainable AI to design highly efficient, highly accurate, highly dependable deep neural networks based on human-driven design and requirements? And this idea of explainable design automation seems a little very foreign to those who've practiced this area, because it has largely been more of a human endeavor, less about collaborating with AI. Here, we're treating AI as a collaborator for us to build better solutions. And not only that, an explainable AI here allows you to learn from the operational targets and prototypes and really explain, in this case, what we call a generator, to design multiple solutions with different trade-offs, which allows us to then iterate with AI in a very synergistic manner to rapidly build customized solutions tailored for the task at hand. And so this explainable design automation is comprised of 2 main phases. One is a principal network design prototyping approach, where a human, such as ourselves, would then kind of craft the scaffolding for this particular task, in which case the task is COVID-19 detection and risk stratification. And we take this, as well as the requirements that we have for what we call a functional, reasonable, ready model, that can then meet certain requirements, and we pass it to a machine-driven design exploration approach. And this allows us to develop a unique machine design network, yet tailored around human requirements and the task at hand. And not only that, the inquisitor discovered insights. So using this explainable AI imposition approach, leveraged by the machine-driven design exploration, can allow us to surface information for greater transparency and accountability. And so the process we took is very systematic and comprised of 4 key steps: data collection, design prototyping, design exploration, as well as design auditing, with the last being very crucial to accelerating development. So in our first step, what we did was data collection. So what we ended up doing was create COVID-X, which is the largest open access database of its kind. It contains 14,000 plus CXR images with around, currently around almost 600 different positive patient cases for COVID-19 across 4 different continents for diversity from different views. So anterior posterior as well as posterior interior, different imaging systems, so from portal systems, fixed clinical systems, and so on and so forth, as well as from different positions, so supine, upright, so on and so forth. And by having this diversity, it will allow the AI model to be able to then learn to be more diverse from this diversity to generalize better. So it's able to then do better for cases that it hasn't seen. And so with our data set, with the COVID-X data set, which contains both chest x-rays, CTs, and so on and so forth, is comprised of a mix of normal cases, non-COVID-19 infections, as well as COVID-19 infections. And as you see on the right, one of them is a non-COVID-19 infection. The other one is a COVID-19 infection. And what you see here, which is obviously painfully clear, is that the differences between non-COVID-19 infections as well as COVID-19 infection is quite subtle to the human eye. And so that's where a lot of difficulties that frontline workers and clinicians have in trying to differentiate between a standard, let's say, flu caused pneumonia versus a COVID-19 caused infection. And that's where the AI component really comes into play to help identify these subtle signs that humans might miss. And so once we've created our data sets, the next step for step 2 is design prototyping. And so what we did was we created a rough scaffolding of what we're looking for, and then we relied on the machine-driven design exploration to be able to help us find the final structure. And so the design prototype we provided to the machine-driven design exploration structure is based on a residual architecture. So there's residual connections or shortcut connections to improve trainability and generalizability. Allows the machine to be able to build deeper neural networks. And the output is a 3-class softmax output that tells you whether or not it's the likelihood of normal, likelihood of non-COVID-19 infection, as well as the likelihood of COVID-19 infection. And we leave the final macro architecture and micro architecture design of the neural network that gets created to the machine-driven design exploration. Because unlike the machine, a human cannot design at the neuron and synapse level, but a machine-driven design exploration approach can. So a machine-driven design exploration approach will always be able to create something that's a lot more custom and tailored for this particular task. And so once we have our prototypes and once we have our data, so we move on to the third step, which is the design exploration approach. So what we do is we feed the design prototype as well as the data we have at hand into the machine-driven design exploration approach. And we also specify operational requirements and constraints for this particular problem. So from talking to different radiologists, frontline healthcare workers, and so on and so forth, we decided and determined that a good set of operational requirements would be having a sensitivity that is greater than 80%, as well as having a positive predictive value of greater than 80%. And so that information is fed into this design exploration process, and then the machine will then explore different permutations and identify what is the most ideal one for meeting these operational requirements. And so the result of this particular process is what you see here, which is the final COVID network architecture. And what you can see is that by leveraging this machine-driven design exploration approach to identify what is the optimal micro architecture design and the best macro architecture design, it creates something that we might not have thought about. So in this case, what we can observe is that it creates a very interesting, efficient macro architecture design, largely comprised of point-wise convolutions as well as group depth-wise convolutions. And so this particular mix allows for really great efficiency, which is important, especially for situations where computational resources are not widely available, which happens in a lot of clinical institutes, especially in developing countries. The other interesting thing we see is that it makes very interesting selective long-range connectivity. So instead of having one layer of the neural network directly connect to the next, it finds ways to then relay information from very early on all the way to the endpoint or the later stages of the neural network. And so this allows for much better data propagation, allows for much better representational power, but because the long-range connectivity is limited to only a sparse few selected connections, it also creates a nice balance in terms of computational efficiency. And so as you can see, by leveraging this approach, we could have really hands-free creation of unique tailored designs with different trade-offs. And in this particular case, the COVIDNet CXR architecture has half the complexity of the well-known ResNet 50 architecture, yet provides 8% greater sensitivity. So not only is it more efficient, it's actually doing better. And that's the beauty of leveraging a human-machine design approach. And so by taking this approach, it allowed us to have significantly faster and smaller neural networks, significantly higher accuracy, sensitivity, as well as positive predictive value. So everything is great. I could just stop right here, as most people do, and say, great, look at my numbers. They're quite good. I'm done. It's ready for deployment. However, one of the big questions is, do numbers really tell all? Is this set of high-level numbers really all we need to determine whether or not our neural network is ready? The answer is no. And that's where a fourth step is added, called design auditing. And so what we do is once we have these created neural networks, we also audit the design of the model, and this actually helps us accelerate development. A lot of people say, okay, great, you've just added an additional step. How does that actually make things faster? The reason it makes things faster is that by adding this additional step, it allows us to identify error scenarios earlier, allows us to understand the reliability of the models faster, and allows us to gain valuable insights very early on to improve the model. So instead of having very long cycles, repeated cycles, only to find out something's wrong at the end, by having design auditing, it allows us to figure things out fast, fix it, and leads to a much shorter development time. And so design auditing is a notion where we audit the behavior of a model at different scales so that we have a much better understanding in terms of what the exact biases are, what the gaps are, what the issues are at a glance, and verify that the model is making the right decision, most importantly, for the right reasons. And not only that, understand through explainable AI what the critical factors are to a model decision. And so here's an example of how we did the audit. So we analyzed all the possible scenarios that could happen. So to be pneumonia being mistaken for COVID-19, so COVID-19 being mistaken for non-COVID-19 infections, could be non-infectious false positives from non-infections to being as infections. And so this allow us to grouping these, clustering these kind of scenarios. We can not only look at error scenarios, but also scenarios where it's doing the right thing, which is typically called an example-based explainability. So here is an example of where it's actual non-COVID pneumonia, and it's detected as non-COVID pneumonia. And there's 91 different samples that fall in this category for this particular test corpus. And so this allows us to get a good idea as to what are the similarities between situations where the decisions are made the same way. Next, what we're then do is we leverage the explainability aspect to help us identify the critical areas that it's leveraging to make decisions. So if you see on the right, it's the same screen. In this case, the scenario is a COVID-19 detection being correctly determined as COVID-19. And here, what you see highlighted are critical areas within the chest X-ray that the underlying AI model that was built determined as the most impactful area for it to make its decisions. And this gives very valuable insights. So if you see here, one of them actually looks at the most of them actually looks at the ground glass capacities as well as the bilateral abnormalities that are seen here. And this is something that resonates to radiologists because these are some of the early signs they determine as being related to COVID-19. So having this kind of leverage and explainable AI to do auditing of model designs allow us to have a number of things. One is greater transparency by understanding the critical factors being leveraged in COVID-19 case detection. The predictions made by COVID-19 can be more transparent and trustworthy for clinicians to leverage during their screening process to help them make better decisions. Again, at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're building innovations to augment the frontline healthcare workers so they can do their jobs better, faster, and with greater consistency. Another thing this allows for is new insight discovery in the fact that some of the critical areas that the COVIDNet AI detected were actually thought to be interesting for radiologists because they didn't really notice or pay attention to it as a sign of COVID-19, but because the explainable AI kind of surfaced it, they're like, wow, okay, this could actually be very useful. Maybe we should start using it. And last but not least is for performance validation to make sure that it is leveraging the right information to make decisions instead of erroneous, improper decisions, such as erroneous visual indicators outside the body, embedded markups, imaging artifacts, and so on and so forth. So then the question a lot of people ask is, doesn't it always make the right decision for the right reason? Well, the answer is no, and I'm going to illustrate some examples into some of the early prototypes that we had when we were designing the different COVIDNet models, which helped us really accelerate the process to make better neural networks. So here, what you see on the left is an early prototype, an internal prototype that we had that had really high accuracy, but we threw it out the door. And the reason we threw away something that has such high accuracy was, if you can see here in the explainable AI visualization, that it is actually determining whether somebody has COVID-19 or not by looking at embedded text in the chest X-ray, which is completely unreliable, and the prototype was essentially gaming the system. And so we resolved this problem, which was a data problem. We resolved it, and we were still able to build really great neural networks with very high performance, yet that are actually looking at the right cues to make decisions. On the right is another case, an early prototype we had for detecting COVID-19 from chest CT, And again, it had almost perfect sensitivity and accuracy, but we threw it out because, as you can see from this auditing process, it was actually looking at the patient table, which is the bed that the actual patient lies on when they're actually getting their CT scans. So another example of making the right decision for all the wrong reasons. And so, given the successes of the models we were able to build, we decided that we wanted to continue to expand the initiative. And the first thing we did was on the notion of risk stratification, which is to help assess the lung severity of SARS-CoV-2 patients. And so we leveraged a score metric by Wong et al. Based on geographic extent, so the extent of lung involvement by ground glass opacity and consolidation, as well as opacity extent, which is the degree of opacity of the lungs. And we worked with a large team of radiologists in Stony Brook Medicine in New York State in the US, and we came up with this, what we call COVID-Net-S, to determine whether or not, or the degree of severity of a COVID-19 infection. And so here's an example, the same process that we leveraged to create COVID-Net-S. And we were able to demonstrate the feasibility of leveraging deep learning for computer-aided severity assessment for SARS-CoV-2 lung severity. So now we're able to then leverage this data to expand it to help clinicians in many different ways. And of course, as I've shown, we also expanded the project to COVID-Net-CT, where we created a neural network for assessing COVID-19 infection from CT scans, and it was trained on COVID-X-CT, our benchmark data set comprised of over 100,000 CT images. And these are examples of the critical areas that Explainable AI was able to identify so that COVID-Net-CT was leveraging. And when we talked and showed this to radiologists, it's like, this makes sense. And so it adds an extra level of trust in the models that are being created. And here's an example of the design of the COVID-Net-CT, which was also created using this human-machine collaborative approach, where the AI, the underlying machine, was able to create the most optimal architecture for CT scan analysis. And so next thing that we focused on was great. We built a lot of great, deep neural networks models that can be leveraged, but only a small population can actually leverage. So data scientists, researchers, clinical scientists, and so forth are able to leverage it, but clinicians, frontline healthcare workers, radiologists just don't have that kind of technical knowledge. So what we did was we launched a new initiative in partnership with Red Hat, as well as Boston Children's Hospital, to create a front-end platform that is designed, again, in an open source, open access manner, that a clinician can use through a GUI to be able to analyze the patient data that I have in an integrative manner. And this is where we're trying to go from research to a product that can actually leverage, but it's a social product that everyone can download in an open source and contribute in an open access manner. So what are the next steps that we're taking? So we're going to continue, because of the widespread usage and interest in the initiative, we're continuing to release new and improved models and data for people to leverage. We're working with clinical institutes around the world for feedback and evaluation. And we're also creating a COVID-Net Cloud, so it's a cloud-driven assessment platform for COVID-19. And we're also incorporating additional patient metadata, such as comorbidity, vital signs, blood tests, and so on and so forth. And so that's the end of this session. So I just want to give special thanks to the COVID-Net team, which is comprised of a mix of experts as well as students from the University of Waterloo, the NRC, hospitals from around the world, Boston Children's Hospital, Stony Brook Medicine, as well as companies that have helped support us, like NVIDIA, HP Enterprises, ARM, CFAR, Rogers, SoftBank, Red Hat, and Figure 1. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Wong. That was an excellent presentation. I do have a first question, and there's one question so far from the audience. So if anyone else does have a question, please submit it through the chat box. I'm sorry that you're all muted right now. But first, so the CREATE program that's putting on this talk today places a lot of focus on development in an interdisciplinary environment. The need for involving several stakeholders from many disciplines, it really has been demonstrated the importance and the need for it during this pandemic. You mentioned early on talking with radiologists, and your next steps are iterating on what you have out right now. Could you talk a little bit about how you balance the risk between consulting with all of your stakeholders and putting out that first product within 7 days?
So that's a very good question. So the fine balance that we have is to have it in a parallel iterative process and to have it early in the loop so you get particular feedback. So as you saw in the early prototyping stage, we had a lot of different issues. Nothing is perfect. There's a lot of key challenges. And so by having this in a process, again, it's by having feedback from this essentially multidisciplinary team of both clinicians, radiologists, even industrial partners, and so on and so forth, having it early, it gives us a much clearer sense into what the challenges are, as well as better ways to resolve challenges. So even though we did it in a very rapid fashion, by doing in parallel with information and consultation from these multidisciplinary teams, it actually helped us accelerate the process so that by the time we have things ready, we have a clear idea into where we stand, as well as the knowledge into where the next steps are. And so what you'll see is that outside of this initial process, so after that first week or so, we continue to improve, we continue to get feedback, and it's not a one-time thing. We always have so if there are mistakes in our models, we admit to it, we correct it, we work with clinicians, they give us the insight, and we release a new version and let people know, please leverage this new improved version because it has better accuracy, the data has better quality, we completely admit to some of the issues that come up in terms of potential, challenges with leveraging it, but we're continuously improving. And so, as you mentioned, that's where the multidisciplinary nature really comes into play. So getting honest quality feedback from people who are actually going to use it in a real-world environment is critical to a project like this.
Yeah, thank you. That is what this whole program is trying to remind people of. So your openness, and especially making the whole platform open source, is an excellent demonstration of doing things that way, which is wonderful. So one of the questions from the audience was, Andrew Ning's research group has ChestXNet, a radiologist level pneumonia detection on chest x-rays with deep learning. If you're familiar with that network, could you explain how your platform is different in terms of deep learning technology?
Sure. So there's a lot of differences. So a couple of key things. First of all, the data being leveraged is different because we want to customize our data for this particular task. So in Professor Ng's work has focused on general pneumonia identification in general. So whereas here, what we did was we honed in specifically on, by talking to clinicians, what are the key areas that is most important for them. So one of the things was most important was outside of identifying whether somebody is perfectly fine or has pneumonia, but to really differentiate between COVID-related pneumonia versus non-COVID related pneumonia. And so that's where our data has really guided towards that direction. From a neural network architecture perspective, so the neural network architecture that we leverage is significantly different because instead of taking a human-crafted approach, which was taken in a lot of the other types of projects, for our initiative, what we try to do was we really try to leverage the power of AI itself and leveraging AI to help us build better architectures tailored for this task. And so one of the key differentiator factors is the architectures, I'm just going to scroll to it, that it gets created is very unique to the point where I could say it's very creative from a technical perspective in how it's actually created and formed. And that is where the approach that I mentioned, the machine-driven exploration approach, really comes in hand. So we have a very unique custom architecture compared to everything else out there that is catered specifically for this particular task. So those are some of the key differences between our initiative and some of the other initiatives. So last but not least, the other key aspect is pretty much almost every aspect of our initiative is completely open source, open access, from the data to the models to the training scripts to the training procedures to the evaluation inference procedures, all the way up to the GUI, which only a few weeks ago is now also made available open source, open access for the entire world to build upon.
Great, thank you for mentioning that GUI is just now open source too, so it kind of really shows the timeline of iterations that your group has gone through. And another question we have, how do you keep people motivated? More of on the human side of things, how do you keep people motivated to do innovative work like this in such a strange time?
Hello, can you see my share screen? Okay, I'm just going to try to share it once more. Okay, it seems I lost shared privileges.
Sorry about that. We only have a couple more minutes left. Could I trouble you to ask the last few questions? Great. So how do you keep people motivated?
Sure, no problem.
Doing research like this.
So the key thing is that I think everyone here who involved is pretty self-motivated, so it doesn't really need too much motivation from myself. But I think I guess for me, just to kind of explain the concept of what the potential impact of the work is enough motivation enough. When you have pretty much right now with our initiative, like I mentioned, the whole world is watching and the whole world is leveraging, you just feel the motivation that you just want to do a good job and put in your best effort to provide a solution to help those around the world for this, I guess, the ongoing pandemic. I think that itself is motivation enough. Doesn't need me to help motivate anything.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So yeah, if you're working in the right area and you're passionate about what you're doing, then you keep it going, right? Have you considered comparing the AI image classification of whether or not it's COVID to a physician's determination of the image? That's another question.
Right. So that's a very good question, and we have, particularly for the risk assessment side. So for the risk assessment side, all of the risk assessments are actually made by really expert radiologists with many years of experience, and so we are in fact comparing with that.
I think I've got everyone's questions right now. Oh, one more. Our participant says, this is a great application for AI. I think this modality would work for the case where data sets are related to severely infected people whose symptoms further evolve into the test. Most of people present with very mild symptoms or no signs or very minor signs, and this is considered to be a big challenge to suppress COVID spreading. sorry, I'm not sure what the question was there, but a comment on an appreciated talk, and definitely very timely for what we're all dealing with right now.
So I'll give a little context to this. I think I know where the question is going.
Okay.
So the key thing is that there have been studies that show that even upon early symptoms, that a lot of it is actually visible in chest radiography. The other key thing is in a situation where individuals are asymptomatic, this is pretty much not the best way for screening. So as a clinician in the front line, they would not do a routine screening for individuals, like using chest radiography for individuals who do not show at least moderate respiratory complaint. So this is largely, again, it's not meant to solve all problems, but here is tackling a particular challenge that is real in a clinical environment. For those cases of asymptomatic situations and so on and so forth, other types of technologies would be necessary.
All right, and I think that's the end of our time today. So I just want to say thank you very much again, Professor Alex Wong, for sharing your research with us and for doing this research in the first place. Everyone at Waterloo, and I speak for everyone at CDB, is very proud to have you as a member, and we just want to thank you and encourage you to keep going, keep doing what you're doing. And thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you everybody, and I hope everybody stays safe, especially during this time of pandemic.
All right, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.